Drop the paper. Hands where I can see them now." He thought he could point a gun at a black man in a red silk shirt on his own porch and get away with it simply because the man's success was an insult to his prejudice. But what Officer Reynolds didn't know was that the man he was threatening wasn't just a new neighbor. He was the architect of Reynolds' own downfall, a federal storm about to break over his head. Where are you watching this story from? Let me know in the comments below. Smash that like button and stay locked in until the very end. The justice served will be ice cold. The morning sun in the upscale enclave of Oakmont Heights had a quality of liquid gold spilling over manicured lawns and glistening on the hoods of imported cars parked in wide, clean driveways. It was a sun that promised peace, a quiet reward for success. On the porch of a newly purchased colonial-style home, Special Agent Daniel Cross was savoring that promise, dressed in comfortable linen trousers and a soft crimson silk shirt that felt like a second skin. He was a portrait of tranquility. A steaming mug of dark roast coffee sat on the wicker table beside him, its aroma mingling with the sweet scent of blooming gardenias from the meticulously kept garden. The Sunday paper was spread across his lap, its rustle the only sound breaking the serene morning hum. He had been in this house for exactly 1 week, a fortress of solitude earned after years spent in the chaotic shadows of federal law enforcement. Here, he wasn't Agent Cross, the man who dismantled criminal empires. He was just Daniel, a man enjoying the silence. That silence was shattered by the guttural roar of an engine, followed by the sharp squeal of tires. A black and white police cruiser had screeched to a halt directly in front of his property, its tires biting into the pristine asphalt. It sat there idling, a predator that had just scented prey. The driver's side door swung open, and Officer Jack Reynolds emerged. Reynolds was a man built of solid, resentful flesh. His uniform stretched taut across a barrel chest and a burgeoning gut. His face was a roadmap of grievances, with pale, cold eyes that scanned Daniel's property, not with a sense of duty but with a palpable sneer. The crimson shirt, the grand house, the relaxed posture, each detail seemed to be a personal affront to him. He slammed the car door, the sound of gunshot in the quiet street, and strode onto the lawn, his hand resting possessively on the butt of his holstered firearm. His partner, a younger, leaner officer named Patterson, got out of the passenger side with a visible reluctance, his movements hesitant as he lingered near the vehicle. Daniel didn't move. He kept his eyes on the newspaper, his body language relaxed, but every nerve ending was on high alert. His training had forged an unbreakable calm in him, a sheath of ice over a core of coiled steel. He had faced down cartel leaders and terrorists. A local cop with a chip on his shoulder was just another variable to be managed. Reynolds stopped at the foot of the porch steps, his shadow falling over Daniel like a shroud. "You live here?" The question was an accusation. Daniel slowly lowered the paper, his eyes meeting Reynolds's. They were calm, steady, betraying nothing. "Good morning, officer. Is there a problem?" Reynolds's lip curled. "I'll ask the questions. I asked if you live here." The venom in his tone was unmistakable. It wasn't about a potential crime. It was about Daniel's very presence in this neighborhood. "Yes, I do," Daniel replied, his voice even. "I just moved in." "I see," Reynolds grunted, his gaze flicking contemptuously over the silk shirt. "Lot of robberies in the area lately, people casing houses looking for opportunities." The implication was as thick as mud. "You don't belong here. You must be a threat." "I'm just reading my paper, officer," Daniel said, the calm in his voice a stark contrast to Reynolds's coiled aggression. "Is that against the law in Oakmont Heights?" A flicker of rage crossed Reynolds's face. He hated being challenged, especially by someone who looked like Daniel. "I'm going to need to see some ID." Daniel didn't move. He knew his rights. He was on his own property, not suspected of any crime. Providing ID was not required. It was a submission to an illegal demand. "I don't think that's necessary," he said politely. "I'm not doing anything wrong." That was the spark. Reynolds's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. The quiet defiance, the refusal to cower, was more than he could tolerate. "You think you're smart?" he snarled, taking a step up onto the porch. "You think you're above the law?" His hand unsnapped the holster. "I said, I need to see your ID now." Daniel slowly folded his newspaper and placed it on the table. He raised his hands slightly, palms open, a gesture of non-aggression. "Officer, you're escalating a situation for no reason." "I'm escalating?" Reynolds's voice cracked with fury. In a flash of movement that was terrifyingly fast, he drew his weapon. The black steel of the Glock gleamed in the golden sunlight, a stark instrument of death in a place of peace. He pointed it directly at Daniel's chest. "Drop the paper. Hands where I can see them now." From the street, Officer Patterson flinched, his voice a nervous tremor. "Jack, what are you doing?" But Reynolds wasn't listening. His world had narrowed to the man in the red silk shirt, a man whose existence was a challenge to his own bitter worldview. In that moment, with a gun aimed at his heart, Daniel Cross felt no fear, only a cold, calculating clarity. This officer had just crossed a line from which there was no return. He hadn't just drawn a gun on a citizen, he had declared war on a ghost, and the entire weight of the federal government was about to come crashing down on his head. The barrel of the Glock was an unblinking eye, a black hole threatening to swallow the tranquil morning whole. Daniel Cross's heart rate was a steady rhythmic drumbeat, a testament to years of conditioning in hostile territories. Panic was a luxury he could not afford. It was the currency of the victim, and he was anything but. He stared past the gun and into Officer Reynolds's eyes, seeing not a guardian of the peace, but a man drowning in his own prejudice, flailing with a weapon. "All right," Daniel said, his voice a low, steady baritone that cut through the tension. He slowly raised his hands higher, keeping them open and visible. "No sudden moves. You're in charge." He gave Reynolds the illusion of control, a verbal offering to soothe the man's fragile ego. It was a de-escalation tactic, a way to disarm the man without touching the weapon. Reynolds's chest puffed out, the taste of dominance momentarily placating his rage. "Damn right I am," he grunted, the gun still fixed on Daniel. "Now the ID, slowly." Daniel held his gaze. "It's in my wallet, inside the house, on the kitchen counter." He would not give Reynolds the satisfaction of producing an ID from his pocket, of validating this illegal stop. By making the officer wait, by forcing him to consider the next step, Daniel was subtly reclaiming control of the tempo. He was turning Reynolds's aggression into a procedural problem. A tense silence stretched. Reynolds's finger was still on the trigger, but a flicker of uncertainty had entered his eyes. His partner Patterson took a hesitant step forward. "Jack, maybe we just run the plates on his car. He said he lives here. Let's just back off." The suggestion was sensible. A lifeline thrown to a man about to make a career-ending mistake. Reynolds shot a venomous glare at his partner. "You questioning my command, Patterson?" But the interruption had broken the spell. The raw, unthinking rage was now mingled with the cold, creeping thought of consequences. Holding a man at gunpoint on his own porch for refusing to show ID was a mountain of paperwork at best, and a catastrophic lawsuit at worst. With a final resentful snarl, Reynolds slowly lowered his weapon, though he did not holster it. "Fine," he spat at Daniel. "We'll be watching you. One wrong move?" He backed off the porch, his eyes still locked on Daniel, and slid back into his cruiser. Patterson gave Daniel a quick apologetic glance before hurrying to the passenger side. The cruiser peeled away with another squeal of tires, leaving a cloud of blue smoke and a shattered piece in its wake. Daniel remained standing for a long moment, the adrenaline finally beginning to course through his veins. He took a slow, deep breath, then another. He didn't reach for his coffee. He didn't pick up his paper. He walked inside, his bare feet cool on the hardwood floors, and retrieved his phone from the kitchen counter where he'd said his wallet was. He didn't call his superior at the FBI. He didn't call the U.S. Attorney's office. He dialed 3 simple numbers, 911. The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. 911, what's your emergency? Daniel's voice was equally calm, but freighted with precision. I'd like to report a police officer, badge number 4829. He has just left my property at 247 Oakmont Drive. He drew his service weapon on me without cause while I was sitting on my own front porch. He was meticulous. He gave the time, the location, the officer's appearance, and a concise, factual account of the incident. He knew every word was being recorded, time-stamped, creating an official, undeniable record that would exist outside of Reynolds's control. It was the first stone laid in the foundation of his case. Miles away in his cruiser, Officer Reynolds was already typing his report on the patrol car's laptop, his thick fingers stabbing at the keys. He was crafting a fiction, a narrative of self-preservation. Responded to reports of a suspicious individual in the Oakmont Heights area. Subject was non-compliant and verbally aggressive. His demeanor suggested a potential threat, forcing a defensive posture. Subject refused to identify himself, cleared the scene without further incident. He omitted the gun. He omitted the fact that Daniel was on his own property reading a newspaper. He was building his side of the blue wall, brick by false brick. But he had no idea that a 911 call, a separate and immutable piece of data, was already being logged into a different system, a call that directly contradicted his report before the ink was even dry. He thought he had won the encounter, put the new guy in his place. He didn't realize he had just stepped into a carefully laid trap. The fuse had been lit, not with a roar, but with a quiet, calculated phone call. The game was on. The sun had climbed higher, its golden light now a harsh, interrogative glare. The tranquility of Daniel's morning was gone, replaced by the cold, familiar hum of a mission in progress. He stood in his spacious, sparsely furnished living room, the phone pressed to his ear. The 911 call had been the opening salvo, a public record. This call was different. This was activating the ghost in the machine. Mitchell! A sharp, no-nonsense female voice answered on the first ring. Rachel, it's Daniel, he said, his voice low. There was a pause on the other end. Then Rachel Mitchell's tone shifted from professional to concerned. Daniel, everything okay? You're supposed to be on leave. Don't tell me you found trouble already. Rachel was more than a colleague. She was his rock within the Bureau's Civil Rights Division. A razor-sharp attorney who could dissect a legal code with the same precision Daniel used to dismantle a conspiracy. They had been partners in the trenches for years, a bond forged in the fires of high-stakes cases. Trouble found me, Daniel replied, and he relayed the morning's events. He didn't embellish or editorialize. He presented the facts with the dispassionate clarity of a field report, the unprovoked stop, the demand for ID, the drawn weapon, the officer's badge number. He recounted it all, a cold chain of events. As she listened, Rachel was silent, but Daniel could practically hear the gears turning in her mind, the legal strategies already forming like storm clouds. When he finished, her voice was glacial. Badge 4829, Oakmont Heights PD, and you have a time-stamped 911 call. Filed it less than 10 minutes after the incident, Daniel confirmed. Beautiful, she breathed. That's clean. He can't wiggle out of the timeline. She was already moving. The sound of a keyboard clicking softly in the background. Jack Reynolds, 42 years old, 17 years on the force. Let's see what we have on him. A few moments of furious typing passed. Well, he's got a history. Several excessive force complaints, all dismissed internally. A couple of racial profiling accusations that were settled out of court by the city. The department has been protecting him. He's a known problem they've chosen to bury. He felt comfortable, Daniel said, the memory of Reynolds's smug face vivid in his mind. He felt untouchable. He drew his weapon on me like he was swatting a fly. Because in his world he is untouchable, Rachel countered, her voice hardening. The local system is designed to protect men like him, which is why we won't be using the local system. The plan was already taking shape, an intricate web being spun from a secure office in Washington, D.C. I'm flagging this as a potential color of law violation, Section 242. We'll open a preliminary federal inquiry. It'll be quiet for now. No sirens, no flashing lights. We'll start with an official request for all relevant materials. Officer Reynolds' service record, all previous complaints against him, and most importantly, his and his partner's body camera and dash cam footage from this morning. Daniel knew the strategy. It was a classic FBI move. You don't storm the castle walls. You quietly demand the keys. You use the weight of federal authority to force the local institution to either comply or obstruct. Either choice would lead them deeper into the trap. They'll stall on the footage, Daniel predicted. They'll claim it was a malfunction, a glitch, a corrupted file. Let them, Rachel said, a hint of predatory satisfaction in her voice. Obstruction of a federal investigation is a much bigger fish to fry than one rogue cop's power trip. If they hide the evidence, they make themselves part of the conspiracy. The chief, the union, anyone who touches that file becomes a target. The conversation was brief, efficient, and deadly. No pleasantries were needed. They were two masters of their craft, setting the pieces on the board. When Daniel hung up, the house was silent again. But the nature of the silence had changed. It was no longer peaceful. It was patient. It was the coiled silence of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Across town, Officer Jack Reynolds was likely laughing about the incident with his buddies in the break room, recounting how he'd put the new rich guy in his place. He was blissfully unaware that his name was now a file on a server deep within the J. Edgar Hoover building. He had no idea that a silent, high-level investigation had just been born, its first tendrils already reaching out, preparing to pull on the threads of his tainted career until the entire rotten tapestry unraveled. The storm was gathering, and Jack Reynolds was standing right in the eye of it, completely oblivious. The official request from the Department of Justice landed on the desk of Oakmont Heights Police Chief Anderson 2 days later. It wasn't delivered by a mail carrier. It was hand-delivered by a stoic FBI field agent in a crisp suit, a clear message that this was not a casual inquiry. The document was an artfully worded piece of legal weaponry, polite in tone, but backed by the full force of federal law. It requested all records pertaining to Officer Jack Reynolds, and specifically the complete unedited audio and video recordings from his patrol unit for the morning of the incident. Chief Anderson read it, then read it again. He was a political animal, a man who had navigated the treacherous currents of City Hall for 20 years. He knew this wasn't about a simple complaint. This was a federal shark circling his small municipal boat. He summoned Reynolds to his office. The door was closed, the blinds drawn. Reynolds swaggered in, still riding the high of his perceived victory on Daniel's porch. He read the request, and his bravado evaporated, replaced by a defensive scowl. "It's nothing," Reynolds blustered. "The guy was a mouthy punk. I put him in his check. He got scared and filed a complaint. It'll go nowhere." Anderson leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steepled. He looked at Reynolds not as a subordinate, but as a liability. "He didn't just file a complaint, Jack. He triggered a federal inquiry. The feds don't get involved for a mouthy punk. Who was this guy?" "I don't know," Reynolds grumbled. "Just some guy dressed like a clown in a silk shirt." The dismissal, the utter lack of curiosity about who he had threatened, was pure Reynolds. His prejudice was a blinder, preventing him from seeing the man, only the stereotype. Anderson sighed. This was the problem with Reynolds. He was a blunt instrument, effective for intimidation, but utterly lacking in finesse. He created messes that others had to clean up. "The footage," Anderson said, his voice flat. Is there anything on it we need to worry about? Reynolds's eyes darted away for a fraction of a second, a flicker of guilt, quickly masked by defiance. The camera was acting up, glitching. The video file might be corrupted. You know how this old equipment is. It was the oldest lie in the book. The blue wall's first line of defense, a technical difficulty that conveniently erased evidence of misconduct. Anderson knew it was a lie. Reynolds knew it was a lie, but it was the lie they had to tell. Make sure it confirms that, Anderson said, a clear order. I want a full diagnostic report on your unit's equipment failure, put it in writing. He was already building his own wall of plausible deniability. The official response went back to the DOJ the next day. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic evasion. The Oakmont Heights Police Department would, of course, cooperate fully. Officer Reynolds's service record was attached, the heavily redacted version. All other documents were being compiled. However, regrettably, due to an unforeseen and unfortunate technical malfunction with the recording equipment in Unit 48, the video and audio data for the specified time period was irretrievably corrupted. They expressed their deepest apologies for the inconvenience. In his home office, Daniel read the emailed response forwarded by Rachel. He didn't feel anger or frustration. He felt a grim sense of satisfaction. It was exactly as he had predicted. "The glitch," he said aloud to the empty room. "They took the bait." On the phone with Rachel moments later, her voice was cold and sharp. "They're stonewalling. Anderson is protecting his man. He thinks he can wait us out, bury us in paperwork." "He thinks we're playing his game," Daniel replied. "He doesn't realize we've already moved to a different board." "Exactly," Rachel said. "Their official claim of a technical glitch is now on record. I'm taking that official response, attaching it to a warrant application, and walking it over to a federal judge this afternoon. We're not requesting the footage anymore, Daniel. We're getting a warrant to seize the entire server it was stored on, along with every diagnostic report and maintenance log for the last 2 years." The strategy had shifted. The objective was no longer just the video of the incident itself. The objective was now the proof of the cover-up. By lying, Chief Anderson and Officer Reynolds had turned a personnel problem into a federal crime. They thought they were erasing evidence. Instead, they were creating new evidence. Evidence of conspiracy and obstruction of justice. The federal government was no longer knocking on the door. It was preparing to kick the door down and seize the entire house. The glitch in the blue wall was about to become the crack that brought the whole structure down. The federal warrant landed like a grenade in Chief Anderson's office. FBI technicians, accompanied by federal marshals, arrived unannounced and began the systematic process of creating a forensic image of the police department's central server. The atmosphere in the precinct was thick with a mixture of fear and resentment. Officers whispered in hallways, their eyes darting towards the IT room as if it were contaminated. The blue wall was under siege from an outside force, and its foundations were shaking. The pressure was immense, but it was not being applied evenly. The primary target of this silent psychological warfare was not Reynolds or Anderson, but the weakest link in the chain, Officer Patterson. Patterson had been a ghost since the incident. He was quiet during patrols, his gaze often distant. The memory of Reynolds drawing his gun, the sheer unnecessary violence of the act, had replayed in his mind 1,000 times. He had joined the force to be like the cops he saw on TV, heroes protecting the innocent. Instead, he found himself complicit in the casual cruelty of a bully with a badge. He knew Reynolds's report was a lie. He knew the body cam glitch was a lie, and every day he remained silent, he was a liar too. The FBI's approach to him was subtle, almost imperceptible. It began with a visit to his home from 2 plainclothes agents. They weren't there to interrogate him. They were there to follow up on a routine inquiry. They were polite, professional, and their questions were ostensibly about department procedures and equipment maintenance. But the real message was delivered between the lines. "We know you were there. We know what happened. We are giving you a chance to be a witness instead of a target." A few days later, a sealed envelope from the U.S. Attorney's Office was delivered to his home. Inside was not a subpoena, but a proffer letter. It was a formal invitation to speak to federal investigators, outlining the terms of limited immunity. It was a lifeline and a threat all in one. It promised that his honest testimony would not be used against him. But the unspoken corollary was that remaining silent, continuing the cover-up, would make him part of a federal conspiracy charge, obstruction of justice, a felony that would end his career and could land him in a federal prison. Reynolds sensed the change in his partner. Patterson was jumpy, avoiding his gaze. In the patrol car, the silence was heavy and suffocating. Reynolds tried to reinforce the wall. "You keep your mouth shut, you hear me?" He'd growl, his voice a low threat. "It's us against them. That's the only rule that matters. Don't you forget it." But the threats of a bitter, cornered man were beginning to sound hollow compared to the silent, immense pressure of the federal government. Reynolds could ruin his career in the department. The feds could take away his freedom. The breaking point came during a tense, late-night conversation with his wife, Emma. She had seen the letter, the fear in his eyes. "What's going on, Ryan?" she pleaded. "You haven't been yourself for weeks." He finally confessed, the words spilling out in a torrent of guilt and anxiety. The porch, the gun, the lies, the federal agents. Emma listened, her face pale. She was a school teacher, a woman who lived in a world of right and wrong, of clear moral lines. "This man, Reynolds," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "He's a cancer, and if you protect him, you let the sickness spread to you, to us. What will you tell our son when he's old enough to ask what you did? That you helped a bully hide his crimes?" Her words were a mirror, reflecting an image of himself that he could no longer stand to see, a coward, a liar, an accomplice. He saw the path Reynolds was leading him down, a dead-end road of compromised integrity, ending in a prison cell or a lifetime of looking over his shoulder. And he saw the other path, the one offered by the feds. It was a terrifying path, a betrayal of the code he had sworn to uphold, but it was the only path that led back to the man he wanted to be. That night, sitting at his kitchen table with his wife's hand on his, Officer Ryan Patterson made a choice. He picked up his phone and dialed the number on the card the FBI agents had left him. He was done protecting Jack Reynolds. He was going to save himself. The blue wall of silence was about to be shattered by the very man who was supposed to help build it. The meeting was set for a neutral location, a drab, anonymous conference room in a budget hotel near the airport. It was a place for transients, for secrets, for conversations that needed no echo. Officer Patterson arrived looking pale and sleep-deprived, his civilian clothes doing little to disguise the rigid posture of a cop. Waiting for him were Rachel Mitchell and an impassive senior FBI agent. There were no bright lights, no intimidation tactics, just a bottle of water, a legal pad, and the heavy weight of the truth. Rachel began, her voice calm and reassuring. "Officer Patterson, thank you for coming. We know this is difficult. We just want to hear your account of what happened. The truth, in your own words." Patterson took a deep breath. His hands clasped so tightly on the table that his knuckles were white, and then he began to speak. The carefully constructed wall of lies crumbled and the story poured out, raw and unvarnished. He described the tranquil morning, the way Reynolds had targeted the house, the contempt in his voice from the very first word. He recounted the illegal demand for ID, Daniel's calm refusal, and the sudden, terrifying explosion of Reynolds's rage. "He just snapped," Patterson said, his voice barely a whisper. "There was no threat. The man was just sitting there. But Reynolds, he looked at him and he saw something that made him hate. He pulled his weapon. I thought he was going to shoot him right there on his own porch over nothing." He didn't stop there. Rachel gently prodded, asking about what happened after, about the report Reynolds filed. "It was a work of fiction," Patterson admitted, shame coloring his words. He told me to back his play. He said the camera had glitched. He logged it in the system that way. It was a direct order to falsify a report. This confession alone was devastating, a direct contradiction to the official police narrative and proof of a cover-up. But Rachel knew there was more. She had seen Reynolds's file. "Ryan," she said, using his first name to build a fragile bridge of trust. "Has this happened before? Have you seen Officer Reynolds behave this aggressively with other citizens?" Patterson hesitated. This was the true betrayal, the crossing of the Rubicon. It wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about exposing a pattern, about burning a fellow officer completely. He looked at Rachel's steady, waiting eyes, thought of his wife's words, and the dam broke. "Yes," he said, the word heavy with finality. "Several times. There was a traffic stop a few months back, a Hispanic family. Reynolds claimed the driver was acting erratically. He pulled the father out of the car, slammed him against the hood in front of his kids. All because the man questioned why he was pulled over. The complaint was buried. Another time, a group of black teenagers at the park. He called them a gang, searched them without cause. It's a pattern. If someone doesn't look the way he thinks they should, or if they don't show him what he considers proper respect, he goes after them. The department knows. They call it proactive policing. They move him around, pay off the lawsuits, and keep him on the street." He spoke for nearly 2 hours. Each story was a nail in Jack Reynolds's coffin. He wasn't just describing an officer who had a bad day. He was painting a portrait of a predator who used his badge as a shield for his bigotry. He was exposing the rot at the core of the department, the systemic failure that allowed a man like Reynolds to operate with impunity for years. When he was finished, the room was silent. Patterson looked drained, as if a physical weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Rachel slid a document across the table. It was a sworn affidavit, a summary of his testimony. "Read this carefully," she said. "If it's accurate, sign it. Once you do, you become a federal witness. We will protect you." Patterson read the words, his own confession staring back at him in cold black ink. It was the end of his life as he knew it, and the beginning of something new. With a hand that barely trembled, he took the pen and signed his name. The secret was out. The shadow had a voice, and that voice was now a weapon aimed not just at Jack Reynolds, but at the entire corrupt system that had protected him for so long. The blue wall hadn't just been cracked. It had been utterly demolished from the inside. The news of Officer Patterson's sworn statement traveled up the federal chain of command and back down to Oakmont Heights with the speed and impact of a missile. It didn't arrive as a rumor. It came in the form of a formal notification to Chief Anderson's legal counsel. The U.S. Attorney's Office now had a cooperating witness from inside the OHPD. They had testimony detailing not only the incident with Daniel Cross, but also a pattern of abuse and a conspiracy to conceal evidence. The game had changed irrevocably. Grand jury subpoenas were being drafted. Chief Anderson was no longer trying to manage a complaint. He was trying to stop his entire department from being indicted. He sat alone in his office late into the night, the glow of his desk lamp illuminating the stark choices before him. His political instincts, honed over decades of self-preservation, were screaming. The blue wall, the code of silence, was a fine principle when dealing with civilian complaints and local reporters. It was a suicide pact when facing the full, crushing weight of a federal racketeering investigation. He had two options. He could continue to protect Reynolds, stand by the fabricated glitch story, and go down with the ship, his career and reputation consumed by a massive federal scandal. Or he could make a cold, pragmatic calculation. He could cut the cancer out to save the patient. He could sacrifice Jack Reynolds to save himself. For Chief Anderson, it wasn't even a choice. Loyalty had its limits, and those limits ended where a federal indictment began. The next morning, he called an emergency meeting with the city's attorneys and the head of the IT department. His demeanor was transformed. He was no longer the defensive chief protecting his men. He was a commander taking decisive action to root out a problem. "I want you to run another deep diagnostic on Unit 48 server logs," he ordered the IT director, his voice ringing with false authority. "I am no longer satisfied with the initial report. I want you to look for any fragmented files, anything that might have been miscategorized as corrupted. Spare no expense. We must have transparency." It was a performance, and everyone in the room knew it. He was giving himself an out, creating a narrative where he, the vigilant leader, had uncovered the truth that his incompetent subordinates had missed. Less than 24 hours later, a miracle occurred. The IT director reported that by using an advanced data recovery technique, they had managed to restore the damaged video file from Officer Reynolds's body camera. The file was, by some incredible stroke of luck, perfectly intact. Chief Anderson held a press conference that afternoon. He stood at a podium, his face a mask of grave concern. He announced that thanks to the tireless work of his department, the missing footage had been recovered. "And what I saw on that video," he said, his voice trembling with manufactured outrage, "deeply disturbs me. It represents a shocking departure from the training and professional standards of the Oakmont Heights Police Department. It is unacceptable." He announced that Officer Jack Reynolds had been suspended indefinitely pending a full internal investigation and that the department was cooperating fully with the Department of Justice. He threw Reynolds to the wolves without a moment's hesitation. He positioned himself as a reformer, a champion of accountability, the man who had cleaned his own house. It was a masterful, if cynical, act of political theater. He had chosen his side. He was abandoning his most problematic officer to save his own career and protect the institution. Jack Reynolds was now alone, stranded on a rapidly shrinking island as the federal tide rushed in. He had thought the blue wall was a fortress. He was about to find out it was a cage, and Chief Anderson had just slammed the door shut and thrown away the key. Chief Anderson's press conference was the appetizer. The leak of the body cam footage was the main course, served up to a hungry and outraged public. It didn't come through official channels. An anonymous digital file was sent to a local investigative reporter known for his adversarial relationship with the police department. Within an hour, the video was the lead story on every news website in the state. By nightfall, it was a viral sensation, a trending topic on every social media platform. The video was more damning than any written report could ever be. It was a raw, unfiltered look into the heart of Jack Reynolds's prejudice. The camera pinned to Reynolds's chest lurched and swayed with his aggressive stride onto the pristine lawn. It captured the golden sunlight, the peaceful porch, and Daniel Cross, the very picture of calm, holding a newspaper. Then came the audio, Reynolds's voice, dripping with contempt. "You live here?" Daniel's reply, calm and measured. The exchange escalated with terrifying speed, all of it initiated by Reynolds. The audience could feel his unwarranted rage building, his voice getting louder, more unhinged. They heard him demand ID. They heard Daniel's polite legal refusal. And then they saw it. The world tilted violently as Reynolds's hand reached down. The click of the unholstering was sickeningly clear. The gun appeared in the frame, a black specter of violence aimed directly at an unarmed man enjoying his Sunday morning. The camera's perspective made it visceral, putting the viewer directly behind the gun. They heard Patterson's nervous plea. "Jack, what are you doing?" A lone voice of sanity ignored. They saw Daniel not flinching, not moving, his hands raised in a gesture of peace even as his life was being threatened. The video ended as Reynolds backed away, but the damage was done. The public reaction was a tidal wave of fury. The technical glitch was exposed as the pathetic lie it was. Chief Anderson's self-congratulatory performance was seen as a desperate act of self-preservation. The narrative was no longer controllable. It belonged to the court of public opinion, and the verdict was unanimous. Hashtags like "Odd Justice for Daniel Cross" and "Us Fire Jack Reynolds" exploded online. The comment sections of news articles were a torrent of rage. "This is not a bad apple. This is the whole damn orchard." He threatened to kill a man for being black in a nice neighborhood, and he's still getting paid. What about the partner? He saw it and did nothing. He's just as guilty. The pressure, which had been building behind closed doors, was now a public firestorm. The district attorney, a cautious politician named Harrison, who was facing re-election, suddenly found his office flooded with calls and emails. Protesters began to gather on the steps of the courthouse, holding signs with Reynolds's face on them. Harrison had initially hoped the federal investigation would move slowly, perhaps ending in a quiet resignation or a civil settlement. He had no appetite for a high-profile, politically charged trial against a police officer. But the video changed everything. To not press charges now would be political suicide. The footage was the smoking gun, and it had been seen by millions. There was no room for ambiguity, no space for quiet deals. The court of public opinion had already convicted Jack Reynolds. The DA's office was now in a corner, forced to either ratify that verdict or be consumed by the public's wrath. The leak had turned a legal case into a public crusade. Daniel Cross, still maintaining his silence, watched it all unfold from his home. He hadn't wanted a media circus, but he knew its power. The glaring, unforgiving light of public scrutiny was now shining directly on the Oakmont Heights Police Department and the district attorney's office. And in that light, the shadows where corruption and injustice thrived could no longer hide. The decision came down from the district attorney's office swiftly. The public outcry, fueled by the irrefutable video, had left them no choice. A warrant was issued for the arrest of Officer Jack Reynolds. The charges were severe: aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, official misconduct, and filing a false report. The system, so often a shield for men like Reynolds, was now being forced to act as a sword. The arrest was calculated for maximum public effect. It wasn't done quietly at Reynolds's home or at the station. 2 detectives from the DA's own investigative unit, men who had no loyalty to the OHPD, were dispatched to arrest Reynolds at the end of his suspension hearing at the police headquarters. He was leaving the chief's office, his face a mask of smug defiance, convinced he would get a slap on the wrist, a few weeks of paid leave. He believed the system would still protect its own. He walked out into the main hallway of the precinct, the same hallway where he had bragged about his exploits for years, and saw the 2 detectives waiting for him. "Jack Reynolds?" one of the detectives asked, his voice devoid of emotion. Reynolds's smug expression faltered, replaced by confusion. "Yeah, what do you want?" "You're under arrest," the detective stated flatly, producing the warrant. Reynolds stared at the paper, then at their faces, his mind unable to process what was happening. His world was tilting on its axis. "Arrest? For what? This is a joke." "It's no joke," the second detective said, stepping forward with a pair of handcuffs. The metallic click as he unlocked them echoed in the suddenly silent hallway. Other officers had stopped, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid curiosity. The sight of a fellow officer, one of their own, about to be cuffed, was a violation of their tribal code. Reynolds' face contorted in a snarl of disbelief and rage. "You can't be serious. I'm a cop. You're not putting those on me." He took a step back, his hand instinctively moving toward his waist, where his gun would normally be. That was a mistake. In an instant, the detectives moved in, their movements practiced and overwhelming. They spun him around, slammed him against the wall with a loud thud, and wrenched his arms behind his back. Reynolds grunted in pain and surprise. The arrogance that had defined him, the physical dominance he had used to terrorize citizens, was useless against men who were not intimidated by his badge. The handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists, the cold steel biting into his skin. The sound was definitive. It was the sound of a career ending, of a life being irrevocably changed. "You have the right to remain silent," one of the detectives began, reciting the Miranda rights in a monotone voice. Reynolds was no longer a feared officer. He was just another suspect, another link in the chain of the justice system. As he was led out of the precinct, past the stunned faces of his former colleagues, the bravado finally crumbled completely. The sneer was gone, replaced by a look of sheer panicked terror. The cameras from the local news stations, tipped off about the arrest, were waiting outside. The flashbulbs erupted, capturing his humiliation for the world to see. The man who had pointed a gun with such arrogance was now a prisoner, his head bowed in shame. From a parked car across the street, Daniel Cross watched the scene unfold. He was an unseen observer, a ghost in the machine he had set in motion. He felt no joy, no triumph, just a grim, profound sense of finality. He had not sought revenge. He had sought accountability. The system had been twisted, forced, and exposed, and it had finally, grudgingly, done its job. The arrest of Jack Reynolds wasn't an end. It was a beginning. It was the moment the price of arrogance was finally called due, and the bill was being paid in cold, hard steel. The man who lived by the power of the gun and the shield of the blue wall had been brought down by the one thing he never accounted for: the unwavering resolve of a man he had judged by the color of his skin instead of the content of his character. The trial of Jack Reynolds was a brief and brutal affair. The prosecution, led by an ambitious assistant district attorney who saw the case as a career maker, presented a simple, airtight case. They played the body cam footage for the jury on a massive screen, the silent courtroom filled with the sound of Reynolds's unhinged rage. They put a shaken but resolute Officer Ryan Patterson on the stand, who recounted not only the events on the porch, but the pattern of abuse that preceded it. His testimony was the final nail, a betrayal from within the blue wall that left the defense with nowhere to go. Reynolds's lawyer tried to argue that his client was a decorated officer under immense stress who made a split-second misjudgment, but it was impossible to argue with the video. The jury saw a bully, not a hero. They saw malice, not a mistake. The deliberation was short. The verdict, when it came, was a foregone conclusion: guilty on all counts. Daniel Cross sat in the back of the courtroom gallery during the sentencing. He wore a simple gray suit, blending in with the other spectators. He was not there as a witness or a victim, but as an observer of the system he had sworn to uphold. He watched as Jack Reynolds, stripped of his uniform and his pride, stood before the judge. The man's face was pale and slack, the arrogance long gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man who had lost everything. The judge spoke, his voice resonating with the gravity of the moment. He spoke of the betrayal of public trust, of the poison of prejudice corrupting the badge, of the terror inflicted upon a citizen in the sanctity of his own home. The sentence was handed down: 10 years in state prison. A gasp rippled through the courtroom. It was a severe sentence, a clear message that Reynolds's actions would not be tolerated. Reynolds's knees seemed to buckle as the marshals stepped forward to lead him away, his life as a free man over. Daniel watched him go, feeling not a flicker of satisfaction, only a profound and weary sense of justice served. It was not vengeance, it was a balancing of the scales. Months later, the golden light of the Oakmont Heights sun once again spilled across Daniel Cross's porch. The wicker chair was in the same spot, a fresh mug of coffee beside it. The world outside had moved on. Chief Anderson had announced an early retirement. The OHPD was undergoing a federally mandated reform program. Ryan Patterson, after resigning from the force, had moved his family to another state to start over, a man forever caught between two worlds. Daniel picked up his newspaper. The silence of the morning was back. But it was a different kind of silence now. It was not the silence of ignorance, but the silence of peace, hard-won and deeply appreciated. He had been tested not in a dark alley or a foreign war zone, but on the front porch of his own home. He had faced a uniquely American brand of danger, one born of hatred and a uniform. He had responded not with violence or with the power of his own badge, but with strategy, patience, and an unshakable faith in the mechanisms of the very system Reynolds sought to corrupt. His fight had not been to destroy one man, but to force a flawed system to confront its own reflection. He had held up a mirror, and the image it showed was too ugly for even the system itself to ignore. The price had been his peace, his anonymity. But the reward was the reaffirmation of a core belief, that justice, though it may grind slowly and imperfectly, can be made to work. It requires courage. It requires strategy. And sometimes it requires a ghost in the machine to ensure the gears turn true. What would you have done if you were in Daniel's shoes when that gun was pointed at you? Do you believe the 10-year sentence was fair, too harsh, or not enough? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And please share this story if you believe in the power of holding the system accountable.